The desert was wide enough to swallow a soul whole. At dusk, the sky burned in shades of bruised purple and copper, the last light clinging to the spines of distant mountains. A hush hung across the land, broken only by the tired shuffle of a barefoot girl making her way down a dust-bitten trail. Her name was Elena Nantan, and though she had not yet seen 20 winters, she carried the weight of an old sorrow. Her hair, long and tangled with grit, stuck to her face as the evening wind stirred, and her ribs pressed sharp beneath the faded dress clinging to her. She whispered to herself in a voice rasped by hunger and shame, "I can't live without a man." The words did not belong to pride, nor to vanity. They belonged to survival. She had been cast out by her kin. Too soft, they said. Too quiet, too much of a burden. A woman without family or husband was nothing but a shadow in the west, and shadows starved quickly under such a wide and merciless sky. Ahead, nestled in the foothills, a ranch stood against the dying light. A house of wood and stone, with smoke curling gently from its chimney. Fences stretched across the land, holding cattle that stirred restlessly in the twilight. And from the doorway, a figure watched her approach, tall, shoulders broad beneath a worn coat, his stance wary as a man who had already lost too much. Caleb Hartwell. His hands, rough from years of rope and timber, gripped the edge of the doorframe as though ready to shut her out. He had buried his wife 3 winters past, and with her had gone the last of his faith in kindness. He lived now by the creed of silence: speak little, trust less, endure always. Elena stopped a few paces from the porch. Her voice cracked like brittle wood. "Please, I need a place." Caleb's eyes narrowed, shadows hiding whatever thought flickered there. "There's no room here," he said flatly. But she did not move. The shame burned her cheeks, yet desperation rooted her feet. "I'll work," she whispered. "Water."
"Wood."
"Whatever you ask." Silence stretched. Behind Caleb, the warm glow of the fire inside the house beckoned like heaven she could not reach. Out here, the night crept closer, carrying with it the cold. And then, from the road, came the sound of hooves. Sheriff Amos Carver rode by on his chestnut horse, the dust of the trail clinging to his boots. His hat sat low over eyes that missed nothing, and his gaze flicked from the girl to Caleb, suspicion already kindling. "She yours, Hartwell?" the sheriff asked, voice as sharp as barbed wire. Caleb's jaw tightened.
"No."
Carver snorted. "Best keep it that way. Folks don't take kindly to strays, especially not Apache girls under a white man's roof." He tugged the reins, gave Elena a look that stripped her down to less than nothing, and rode on toward town. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The shame was a hot stone in her chest. She turned, ready to vanish into the dark and spare him the burden of her presence. But Caleb's voice halted her. "You can sleep in the barn. Just the night." Relief struck her so hard her knees nearly buckled. She nodded quickly, too quickly, and followed the dirt path toward the barn. The barn smelled of hay, earth, and the faint sweetness of horses. Elena curled into the straw, her thin shawl wrapped tight. Through the cracks in the wall she could see the stars beginning to pierce the sky, cold, distant fires scattered across eternity. She whispered to herself again, the words softer this time, almost a prayer. "If I can stay, maybe I can learn to breathe again." Across the yard, inside the house, Caleb lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling beams. He had told himself it was charity, nothing more. Yet the quiet presence of another soul on his land stirred an unease in him, a reminder that loneliness, once breached, did not easily close again. He turned, pressing his face into the pillow. But no matter how he tried to bury it, he could still feel her there, like a faint heartbeat carried on the desert wind. And so the night deepened, holding both of them, 2 strangers bound not by words, but by silence. Silence, and the fragile chance of something neither yet dared to name. The days did not announce themselves with trumpet or drum. They came quietly, like the dawn slipping through the cracks of the barn, like dust settling on old wood. Elena rose with the light each morning, her body aching but her will steady. She carried buckets of water from the well until her shoulders burned, gathered eggs from nervous hens, and mended what needed mending. No one had told her to, not aloud, but work was the only language she trusted to earn her keep. Caleb Hartwell watched from a distance. He was a man carved by silence. Words seemed to weigh too much on his tongue. Yet he noticed small things, the way her dark hair fell loose as she leaned over the washboard, the quiet hum that slipped from her lips when she ground corn into meal, the delicate patience with which she stitched a torn saddle strap without being asked. He offered her little in return. Only gestures. A folded blanket left on the barn door one night, smelling faintly of cedar. An extra biscuit set on the kitchen table in the morning, as though it had simply appeared. She never asked if they were meant for her. She only accepted them with bowed head, as though afraid to shatter the fragile mercy between them. But kindness was never free of the world's eyes. One afternoon, Martha Ellison came rattling up the dirt path in her wagon, bringing jars of peach preserves and a voice that carried farther than it should. She was a neighbor, old enough to know the weight of rumor, sharp enough to cut with it. Her eyes narrowed when she spotted Elena kneeling in the garden, her hands deep in the soil. "Who's the girl?" Martha asked, her tone more statement than question. Caleb wiped sweat from his brow, his hand pausing on the post he was fixing. "Just helping around." "Helping?" Martha pursed her lips, letting the word hang like a noose. "A man alone, taking in an Indian girl under his roof. You know what tongues will say." Caleb met her gaze steadily, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Let them talk." Martha sniffed, but her eyes softened just enough to betray a flicker of something else, pity or perhaps warning. She left the preserves on the porch and drove away, dust clouding in her wake. Elena, who had heard every word, felt the shame rise hot in her chest. That night, she lay awake in the barn, staring at the beams overhead, and whispered into the dark, "I will not be the reason he loses everything." The sheriff came again not long after. Amos Carver, heavy in the saddle, his presence filling the yard like smoke. He dismounted, boots crunching against the gravel, and spat tobacco into the dirt. "You still got her here?" His eyes flicked toward the barn, cold and sharp. Caleb didn't flinch. "She works, earns her keep. She'll cost you more than she's worth." Carver's voice carried the weight of a man who thrived on fear. "People are talking already. They'll say she's your property, or worse. You want to ruin yourself over pity." Caleb said nothing. Silence was his armor, his defiance. Elena stood just inside the barn door, unseen, her hands trembling as the words cut her open. Property. Worse. Shame bled through her like water through cloth. That night, she whispered to Caleb's shadow as he passed the barn, "I'll go. At dawn. It is better." He did not answer. But when she woke in the gray light of morning, a loaf of bread still warm from the oven sat on the threshold, wrapped in cloth. Her throat closed, tears burning as she pressed the gift to her chest. He had not stopped her with words. He had stopped her with bread. The bond between them grew in ways neither named. One evening, a storm rolled in from the horizon, black-bellied and wild. Thunder cracked open the sky, lightning scattering like shattered glass. The cattle bawled in fear, the chickens scattered, and the wind tore shingles from the barn roof. Elena rushed out into the rain, shawl clutched around her shoulders, fighting to drag a tarp over the henhouse. Her dress clung to her skin, hair whipping in her eyes. Caleb found her there, struggling against the storm, and without a word he seized her arm and pulled her beneath the porch. They stood dripping, water running down their faces, breath coming hard. For a long moment, they simply listened to the rain hammering the earth, lightning painting their faces in quicksilver flashes. Her hand brushed his as she steadied herself. Neither pulled away. The silence between them shifted, no longer hollow but filled with something raw, unnamed, and dangerously alive. The storm passed, leaving the world washed clean, but rumors gathered darker than any cloud. Miguel Reyes, the ranch hand, came to Caleb one evening, his voice low. "They say Carver's stirring men in town. They say the girl is your woman or your shame. Men don't like what they don't understand. Caleb tightened the reins he was holding, leather creaking under his grip. His silence was steady, but anger flickered in his eyes. Elena heard, though she was not meant to. Later, curled in the straw of the barn, she whispered into her hands, "If staying means destroying him, I will go." But her heart, traitorous and aching, wanted nothing more than to stay. The morning broke hard and bright, the kind of morning that does not soften its edges. Sunlight spilled across the ranch like a blade, throwing long shadows from the fence posts. But there was another shadow creeping closer, darker than the dawn, heavier than silence. The sound came first, hoofbeats on the hard-packed road, many of them, steady and sure. Elena, kneeling at the well with a bucket, froze. Dust rose on the horizon, and soon the shape of men on horseback cut against the light. At their head rode Sheriff Amos Carver, his jaw set, his hand resting easy on the butt of his rifle. The men fanned out as they reached the yard, a wall of horses and eyes sharp with judgment. Some spat, others shifted in their saddles, but all looked past Caleb to the girl standing small beside the well. Carver's voice carried like thunder across the still air. "Time's up, Hartwell. The girl goes. You can't keep her here. Folks won't stand for it." Elena's breath caught. The bucket slipped from her hands and clattered against the stones, water spreading like a stain in the dust. Shame rose inside her like a flood, drowning her ribs, her voice, her very bones. She stepped forward, trembling. "If it will spare him," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the ground, "I'll leave." The words scraped her throat raw. For the second time in her life, she said them not to beg, but to surrender. For Caleb's sake, she would vanish into the desert, nameless, rootless, less than a shadow. But Caleb Hartwell moved before her. He stepped onto the porch, coat unbuttoned, boots planted firm in the dust. His hands did not reach for a gun, he needed none. His silence, long practiced, now carried the weight of iron. "She stays." The words were soft, but they cut through the morning like steel. Carver sneered. "You'd ruin yourself over an Indian stray?" Caleb's eyes never wavered. He placed a hand lightly on Elena's shoulder. Not possession, not claim, but steadying. "She is under my roof. That makes her mine to protect. If you want her gone, Sheriff, you'll have to go through me." The yard held its breath. Rifles shifted in nervous hands. The men waited for a spark. Violence hung in the air like dry kindling begging for flame. Elena felt it too, the weight of a dozen eyes, the possibility of blood soaking into the dirt. Her knees quivered. Yet when she glanced up at Caleb, his face was calm, his jaw steady, his presence a wall that would not bend. And in that moment, she understood. The phrase she had carried like a wound, "I can't live without a man," no longer meant weakness. It meant this. It meant a man who chose to stand, not because she was his property, but because she was his equal in dignity, his partner in survival, a soul he would not see erased. The silence stretched until even the sheriff's scowl faltered. One by one, the men's rifles lowered. Their shame was heavier than their judgment, for Caleb's quiet courage had left no room for their cruelty. Carver spat into the dirt. "This ain't over," he muttered. He yanked his reins, turning his horse sharply. The others followed, muttering, shifting, but not daring to look Caleb in the eye as they retreated down the road. The dust of their departure hung in the air long after they were gone. When the last hoofbeat faded, Elena crumpled. The strength that had carried her dissolved, leaving her in tears upon the porch steps. Caleb bent, his hand steady beneath her arm, lifting her gently. He said nothing, for words were never his gift, but the warmth of his touch spoke all she needed to hear. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, her tears soaking the fabric of his shirt, and whispered with a trembling voice, "I thought I was nothing. I thought I was ash." Caleb's silence answered her. The steady rise and fall of his chest, the strength of his hand as it held her upright. These were the words he could not speak. "You are not nothing. You are the flame. Life on the ranch did not become easier after that day, but it became theirs. Work was heavy, the soil stubborn, the sky still merciless. Yet every morning, two figures rose together with the dawn, one carrying buckets, the other mending fence posts, both moving in rhythm not of master and servant, nor savior and saved, but of two lives bound by the same fragile thread of dignity. Elena's laughter, small at first, began to spill into the air as she worked, surprising even herself. Caleb, though his words remained few, found his silences softer, filled not with loneliness, but with the quiet presence of someone who had chosen to stay. The world might still whisper. The sheriff might still watch. But inside those fences, by that fire, they had carved out something unassailable, a place where rejection gave way to belonging, where ash had turned to flame. Closing reflection. Narrator's voice to the reader. And so it was, in the Wild West, where the land was wide and the nights unforgiving, that survival was not measured only in bullets or bread. It was measured in the rare courage of two souls choosing each other, again and again, against the weight of a world that said they should not. Remember this. Dignity is not always won in grand battles. Sometimes it is found in the quiet act of standing beside another, refusing to let them be erased. We are all ash beneath the sky until someone sees the flame in us and stays.